The manila folder slammed onto the conference table with a sound that made everyone flinch. My hand was still on it, 73-year-old fingers with prominent veins and arthritic knuckles, but steady, so very steady. For someone who's supposedly too emotional to handle this project, I certainly keep excellent records, I said quietly, looking Director Harrison directly in the eyes. The room fell silent. After 42 years with Westridge Community Hospital, I was finally ready to be heard. 3 days earlier, I'd been sitting in this same conference room being told I was being removed from the patient advocacy program I'd built from nothing. The program that had saved the hospital millions in potential lawsuits and had improved patient satisfaction scores by 37% over the past 5 years. Margaret, we need someone with a more analytical approach, Harrison had said, not quite meeting my eyes. The board feels your emotional connection to patients, while admirable, may be clouding your judgment on the financial aspects. Emotional. The word they always used when they wanted to dismiss a woman's expertise, especially an older woman. I'd heard it my entire career, but never had it been used to strip away my life's work. I'd nodded, gathered my things, and walked out with dignity, but I hadn't gone home to cry. I'd gone to the records room instead. Now, 3 days later, the emergency board meeting I'd requested was underway. Harrison looked uncomfortable. The new MBA they'd hired to replace me, Jason, something, barely 40 years old, looked confused. Mrs. Abernathy, we appreciate your dedication, but, Harrison began. Dr. Abernathy. I corrected him mildly. I'd earned my doctorate in healthcare administration 15 years ago, while working full-time and caring for my dying husband. Harrison knew this. Everyone in the room knew this. Of course, Dr. Abernathy, he amended, with the faintest tightening around his mouth. As I was saying, the decision has been made with the hospital's best interests in mind. I opened the folder and began laying out documents in a neat row. These are the financial reports from the patient advocacy program for the past 5 years. You'll notice that in year 1, we saved the hospital approximately $300,000 in potential litigation costs. By year 5, that number had grown to $1.7 million. The board members leaned forward. Numbers had a way of capturing attention that words, especially from an older woman, sometimes couldn't. And these, I continued, laying out another set of documents, are the patient satisfaction surveys. Prior to the program, our satisfaction rate was 62%. Current rate is 91%. As you know, this directly impacts our Medicare reimbursement rates. Jason shifted in his seat. I could feel him reassessing me, realizing perhaps that beneath my sensible cardigan and gray hair was a mind that had been tracking metrics and outcomes long before he'd earned his MBA. Margaret Dr. Abernathy. Harrison corrected himself quickly. Nobody disputes that your program has been successful, but healthcare is changing. We need fresh perspectives, innovative approaches. Like the centralized complaint management system Mr. Peterson proposed? I asked, nodding toward Jason. The one that would replace personal patient advocates with an online portal and call center. Jason looked startled that I knew about his proposal. I smiled slightly. I've been in healthcare for 42 years, young man. People talk to me, especially nurses and administrative staff who worry about patients getting lost in a digital system. I placed another document on the table. This is research from 3 hospitals that implemented similar systems. Patient satisfaction dropped by 28% on average. Litigation increased by 45% within 18 months. The board members began exchanging glances. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't shed a tear, just facts and figures laid out in black and white. There's something else you should know, I said, pulling out the final document. This is a letter of intent from Brennerman Health Group. They've been watching our patient advocacy program for some time. They're interested in implementing it across their 15 hospitals and have offered me a consulting contract to help them do it. Now I had their full attention. Brennerman was our biggest competitor in the region. You wouldn't, Harrison began. Share proprietary information? Of course not, I said, smoothing my skirt as I sat back. Everything I developed here belongs to Westridge. But my expertise, my experience, that belongs to me, and apparently, it has value elsewhere. The silence in the room was profound. I'd worked at Westridge since I was 31 years old. I'd seen administrators come and go. I'd weathered budget cuts, restructuring, and 3 complete overhauls of our electronic records system. I'd stayed because I believed in the hospital's mission. But I'd be damned if I'd let them push me aside without understanding exactly what they were losing. Perhaps we've been hasty, said Elaine Woodward, the only other woman on the board, and at 68, the only member close to my age. Dr. Abernathy's results speak for themselves. The decision's been made, Harrison said firmly. We've already announced Mr. Peterson's appointment. Actually, said Dr. Kenwood, the chief of surgery, speaking for the first time, the board voted based on your recommendation, Thomas. If that recommendation was made without all the relevant data, he gestured to the documents spread across the table. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. I'd learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman could do was remain silent and let others come to the right conclusion. Especially men who thought they were having the idea themselves. We could create a transition period. Jason offered unexpectedly. Dr. Abernathy could stay on, help implement some of the technological upgrades while maintaining the personal advocacy elements that have been successful. I looked at him with new interest. Perhaps he wasn't just another ambitious young man with a shiny degree and no practical experience. That could work, I said, nodding slowly. The program does need modernization in certain areas. What it doesn't need is elimination. The tension in the room began to dissipate. Board members who'd been avoiding my eyes were now looking thoughtful, even relieved at the potential compromise. All except Harrison. This is highly irregular, he said, gathering the documents I'd spread out and pushing them back toward me. The board has already voted. And the board can vote again with complete information, said Elaine firmly, unless you'd prefer we also discuss why complete information wasn't provided in the first place. Something passed between them, some history or knowledge I wasn't privy to. Harrison's face flushed. Fine, he said. We'll revisit the decision at next week's regular meeting. Until then, Dr. Abernathy remains in her position, and Mr. Abernathy remains in her position. Peterson can work with her on transition possibilities. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. As the meeting adjourned, several board members stopped to speak with me, suddenly remembering my contributions over the years, the times I'd helped navigate difficult situations with patients or families. Jason approached last. I didn't know the full history of the program, he said. I was told it was outdated, inefficient. Many things that appear inefficient at first glance are actually essential. I replied, like taking time to listen to patients. It seems inefficient until you realize how much valuable information you gain and how much trust you build. He nodded, looking thoughtful. I'd like to learn more about your approach, if you're willing to share. I'm always willing to share knowledge, I said. That's how good systems survive beyond any individual. As I gathered my documents, I noticed Harrison lingering by the door, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. I'd known Thomas Harrison for 20 years, had watched him climb from department manager to director. I'd supported his initiatives, covered for his mistakes, celebrated his successes. And yet, when the opportunity came, he tried to discard me without a second thought. Margaret, he said as I approached the door. This wasn't personal. I stopped and looked at him, this man 15 years my junior, who still somehow saw me as obsolete. I know, Thomas, it never is. That's the problem. I walked past him with my head high, the folder of documents tucked securely under my arm. The battle wasn't over it, never really was for women like me, but for today at least, the paperwork had spoken louder than any emotion could. My office was exactly as I'd left it 3 days ago, when I'd been told to clear out by the end of the week. The spider plant I'd nurtured for a decade still sat in the window, thriving despite neglect. Much like me, I supposed. I set down my folder and eased into my chair, feeling the familiar comfort of the cushion I'd added to support my back during long days. The momentary triumph of the meeting was fading, replaced by the heavy reality of what lay ahead. A transition period could mean many things, not all of them good. My desk phone rang, startling me. Margaret Abernathy, I answered, the professional tone automatic after decades. Dr. Abernathy, it's Emma at the front desk. Mrs. Keller is here asking for you specifically. She's quite upset about her husband's treatment plan. The Kellers. Harold had been diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma 3 weeks ago. His oncologist had recommended an experimental treatment protocol, but the insurance was balking. Send her back, Emma. And could you bring us some tea, please? Of course, Dr. Abernathy. It's good to have you back. I felt a lump form in my throat at the simple kindness in the young receptionist's voice. This was why I stayed these human connections that formed the real heart of healthcare. Clara Keller appeared in my doorway moments later, her face drawn with worry and lack of sleep. At 75, she was one of the few patients who actually had a few years on me. Margaret, she breathed, relief evident in her voice. They told me you were gone, that I needed to talk to some new online system. But I told them I need to talk to Margaret. She'll understand. I rose and guided her to the comfortable visitor's chair I kept specifically for distressed family members. I'm still here, Clara. Tell me what's happening with Harold. As she explained the latest complications with insurance authorizations and medication side effects, I took notes and asked clarifying questions. This was the work Harrison and his young MBA considered too emotional, this human interaction that required both empathy and analytical thinking, both heart and head. So they're saying the medication isn't on the approved list, but Dr. Winters says it's the only one that's shown real results for Harold's specific type of lymphoma. Clara finished, twisting her wedding ring 60 years of marriage represented in that simple gold band. I'll call the insurance company personally, I promised, and I'll review Harold's entire case with Dr. Winters. We've successfully appealed similar decisions before. Emma arrived with tea, served in the real mugs I kept in my office, rather than the styrofoam cups from the cafeteria. Another small touch that Harrison probably saw as inefficient. You know, Clara said, wrapping her gnarled fingers around the warm mug. Harold and I have been coming to this hospital for 50 years. We had our children here. We've seen it change, not always for the better. But knowing you were looking out for patients, it made a difference. I reached over and patted her hand. And I'll continue to do that, Clara, one way or another. After Clara left, with promises of action and follow-up, I turned to my computer. The battle in the boardroom had been just the beginning. Now I needed to shore up my position with irrefutable evidence of the program's value, not just financial metrics, but human outcomes that couldn't be captured in a spreadsheet. I began pulling patient case files, the difficult ones, the ones where personal intervention had made the critical difference. The elderly man who couldn't understand his discharge instructions and would have taken his medications incorrectly without an advocate's help. The young mother whose postpartum depression was caught by an advocate who noticed her silence during rounding. The non-English-speaking family who needed cultural as well as linguistic translation of their child's complex diagnosis. Each case represented not just a potential liability avoided, but a human being helped through one of the most vulnerable experiences of their life. Each one reinforced what I had always known. Healthcare without humanity wasn't healthcare at all. A knock at my door interrupted my work. I looked up to see Nurse Jacobs, one of our most experienced floor nurses at 62 years old. "So the rumors of your demise were greatly exaggerated," she said with a smile, entering without waiting for an invitation. We'd worked together for over 20 years. Formality had long since fallen away. "Temporarily, at least," I replied. She settled into the chair Clara had vacated, words spreading fast. "The nurses are relieved. That new system they were planning to implement would have been a disaster." "You knew about that?" "Of course we knew. Nothing happens in this hospital without the nurses knowing." She leaned forward. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because we need to make sure you stay." "The board will vote next week," I said. "Harrison clearly wants me gone." "Harrison wants a lot of things," Nurse Jacobs said cryptically, "including a bigger bonus for cutting costs. But he's not the only power in this place." She was right, of course. Hospitals were complex ecosystems. Administrators held official power, but nurses, doctors, and long-term staff held different kinds of influence. "What are you suggesting, Diane?" I asked, using her first name deliberately. "I'm suggesting that by next week's board meeting, every department head should understand exactly what they'd be losing if your program is dismantled. I'm suggesting that patients like Clara Keller might want to share their experiences. I'm suggesting," she said with a pointed look, "that you've been building relationships in this hospital for 42 years, and it's time to use them." I considered her words. I'd always operated by the rules, had always believed that good work spoke for itself. But if these past few days had taught me anything, it was that good work could be ignored when it was convenient. "I'm not sure I know how to play that kind of politics," I admitted. Diane laughed. "Margaret, you've been navigating hospital politics since before Harrison had his MBA. You just did it differently with integrity and relationships instead of PowerPoints and buzzwords." She stood up. "The nurses' union meeting is tomorrow. We'd welcome your perspective on how these changes might affect patient care." After she left, I sat back in my chair, thinking. I'd spent my career being the calm, reasonable voice in the room, the one who followed protocol and trusted the system to recognize value. And where had it gotten me? One signature away from being pushed out. Perhaps it was time for a different approach, not abandoning my principles, but standing up for them more forcefully. Using the very networks and relationships I'd built over decades to protect the work that mattered. I turned back to my computer and began a new document. At the top, I typed Patient Advocacy Program, Human Outcomes, and Financial Impacts. Below that, I began listing every alliance, every supportive colleague, every grateful patient who might be willing to speak up. If Harrison wanted to make this about numbers and efficiency, I'd show him numbers. But I'd also show him what his spreadsheets couldn't capture the human element that made healthcare actually work. My phone rang again. It was Jason Peterson. "Dr. Abernathy? I was wondering if we could meet tomorrow to discuss the program in more detail. I've been reviewing the materials you presented, and I have some questions." "Of course, Mr. Peterson. How about 9 a.m., and perhaps afterward, you could shadow me for a few hours, see how the program works in practice." "That would be helpful, thank you." He hesitated. "And please, call me Jason." After we hung up, I smiled slightly. The young man wasn't the enemy. He was just the newest player in an old game, one where the rules kept changing but the fundamental truth remained the same. Healthcare was about people, not profit margins, not efficiency metrics, but people. And no one understood that better than those of us who'd been in the trenches for decades, watching trends come and go while the essential human needs remained constant. My computer dinged with an email notification. It was from Elaine Woodward, the board member who had spoken up for me. Margaret, could we meet for coffee before the board vote? There are some things about Harrison's plans you should know, things that go beyond your program. Interesting. I typed a quick reply, suggesting a time and place away from the hospital. As I shut down my computer for the day, I noticed my reflection in the darkened screen. The face looking back at me was lined with age, yes, but also with experience, with knowledge that couldn't be taught in any MBA program. Harrison had tried to use my age against me, to suggest that emotional was code for outdated. He'd underestimated me. Many had over the years. The difference was that now, after 42 years, I was done letting it slide. I gathered my things and headed for the door, nodding to the evening cleaning staff Maria and Jose, who'd been working here almost as long as I had. They knew every corner of this hospital, heard every unguarded conversation, another resource Harrison would never think to value. "Good to see you, Dr. Abernathy," Maria said warmly. "We heard they tried to make you leave." "They tried," I agreed, "but it seems I'm not quite finished here yet." "Good," Jose said firmly. "This place needs people who care about more than money." As I walked to my car in the fading evening light, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about preserving my job or my program. It was about standing up for a vision of healthcare that was being eroded by people who saw patients as data points and staff as expendable resources. Tomorrow would bring meetings, strategy sessions, careful alliance building, a kind of work I'd always done quietly, behind the scenes, supporting others. Now I would do it for myself and for everything I believed in. They had called me emotional, thinking it would diminish me. Instead, it had awakened something, a determination that had always been there, waiting for the moment when it was truly needed. I started my car, the familiar rumble of the engine I'd maintained for 15 years, a comfort in its reliability. Like me, it might not be the newest model, but it knew its purpose and performed it well. As I pulled out of the parking space, I caught sight of Harrison leaving the administrative wing, his expensive briefcase swinging from his hand. He didn't see me, he rarely did. But he would. By this time next week, he most certainly would. 9 a.m. arrived with the familiar hustle of a hospital morning. I'd been at my desk since 7, reviewing cases and preparing for my meeting with Jason. The night had brought clarity and a strategy that felt right, not combative, but firmly principled. When Jason knocked on my door precisely at 9, I was ready. He looked different today, less the confident MBA and more the attentive student. Good. Openness to learning was essential in healthcare. "Thank you for meeting with me, Dr. Abernathy," he said, taking the seat I offered. "I've been thinking a lot about our discussion yesterday." "As have I," replied. "But before we get into the program details, I'm curious what attracted you to healthcare administration in the first place." The question seemed to surprise him. Well, healthcare is a growing sector with complex challenges. The opportunity to implement efficient systems that improve operational outcomes. I held up a hand. "That's the answer from your job interview. I'm asking about you, Jason. Why healthcare and not, say, manufacturing or finance?" He paused, considering. "My grandmother, actually. She had a stroke when I was in college. The care she received was inconsistent. Some providers treated her like a person, others like a case number. I thought maybe I could help change that." Now we were getting somewhere. "And has your work so far helped change that?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's complicated. The systems I've helped implement have improved efficiency, reduced errors, but sometimes the human element gets lost in optimization." I nodded. That's the fundamental tension in healthcare administration. Efficiency versus humanity. The best administrators find ways to achieve both. I opened the folder I'd prepared. Let me show you how our patient advocacy program does exactly that. For the next hour, I walked him through case studies, financial reports, and process maps. Not just the results, but the methodology, how personal interaction with patients could identify issues before they became problems. How trained advocates could bridge the gap between clinical language and patient understanding. The centralized system you proposed isn't wrong, I told him, acknowledging his work. Digital tools can enhance what we do, but they can't replace the human connection that makes our program effective. Jason was taking notes, asking thoughtful questions. The hospital in Pittsburgh that tried a fully digital system, their litigation costs increased by how much? 78% in the first year, I said. They've since reintroduced human advocates, but rebuilding patient trust has been difficult. He frowned. Harrison never mentioned those statistics when he briefed me on the project. I'm not surprised, I said carefully. Thomas has very specific goals for the hospital's financial performance this year, goals tied to his compensation package. Jason looked up sharply. You think he deliberately withheld information from the board? I think, I said, choosing my words with precision, that Thomas believes he's doing what's best for the hospital's bottom line. The problem is that healthcare isn't just a bottom line, it's people's lives. I glanced at my watch. We have rounds in 10 minutes. Would you like to come along, see how the program works in practice? He nodded, gathering his notes. Absolutely. As we walked the corridors toward the oncology ward, staff members greeted me warmly. Nurses, technicians, environmental services workers, many stopped to say they were glad to see me back. I introduced Jason to each of them, noting how their expressions changed slightly when they realized who he was, the man who had almost replaced their patient advocate. You know everyone, he observed as we waited for the elevator. 42 years, I reminded him. But more importantly, I make it a point to know everyone. The security guard who notices when a visitor seems distressed. The cafeteria worker who reports that a patient isn't eating. Every person in this hospital is part of the care team, whether they realize it or not. In the oncology ward, I introduced him to Harold Keller, Clara's husband, who was receiving his treatment. Dr. Abernathy got the insurance company to approve my medication, Harold told Jason proudly. Called them herself and wouldn't take no for an answer. Stayed on the phone for 2 hours. 3, I corrected with a smile. But who's counting? My wife is, Harold said seriously. Says those 3 hours might have saved my life. As we continued our rounds, Jason saw firsthand how the advocacy program worked, the way patients' faces lit up when they saw me, the complex issues I helped navigate, the relationships with clinical staff that allowed for quick resolution of potential problems. By noon, when we returned to my office, Jason was subdued. I had no idea, he admitted. The program description I was given, it didn't capture any of this. It's hard to quantify human connection, I said. That's why it's often the first thing cut when budgets get tight. He was silent for a moment. My proposal would have destroyed all of this. It would have replaced it with something different, I corrected gently. Something that might have worked well in some ways but failed in others. What do you suggest instead? He asked. I smiled. This was the question I'd been waiting for. A true collaboration. Your digital systems integrated with our human approach. Technology supporting connection, not replacing it. I pulled out a draft proposal I'd worked on until late the previous night. Something like this. As Jason read through my suggested integration plan, I could see his mind working, adding his own ideas, seeing the possibilities. This could work, he said finally. It's actually better than either approach alone, more sustainable long term. That's the benefit of experience combined with fresh perspective, I said. Neither of us has all the answers, but together we might. He looked at me with new respect. I'd like to revise my proposal before the board meeting. Would you be willing to work with me on it? I would, I agreed. But you should know that there may be resistance from Harrison. Jason's expression hardened slightly. Let me worry about Harrison. This is the right approach for the hospital, and that's what matters. As he left to attend another meeting, I felt cautiously optimistic. I'd found an ally where I least expected one, but Harrison still held considerable power, and I knew better than to underestimate him. My phone rang. Elaine Woodward, confirming our coffee meeting for tomorrow morning. Another potential ally, with insider knowledge of the board's dynamics. I turned back to my computer, ready to document today's patient interactions. The work continued as it always had, one patient at a time, one day at a time. But now with renewed purpose and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. They had called me emotional, dismissing decades of expertise with a single word. But emotion wasn't my weakness, it was my strength. The ability to care deeply while thinking clearly, to balance compassion with competence. And by this time next week, everyone would know it. The coffee shop 3 blocks from the hospital had been my morning sanctuary for decades. Quiet enough for conversation, busy enough for privacy in plain sight. Elaine Woodward was already there when I arrived, her silver hair catching the morning light. Margaret, she greeted me, rising slightly as I approached. Old school manners, like mine. We were of the same generation, though our paths had been different. She in hospital administration and finance, me in patient care and advocacy. Thank you for meeting me, I said, settling into the chair across from her. Your message was intriguing. Elaine waited until the server had brought my tea before leaning forward. What do you know about Helix Healthcare? I frowned slightly. The for-profit hospital group? They've been acquiring smaller hospitals across the state. Known for aggressive cost-cutting and prioritizing profitable services over community needs. She nodded. Harrison has been in talks with them for 6 months, exploratory discussions about a potential acquisition of Westridge. The news hit me like a physical blow. Westridge had been independent for over 100 years, a community hospital in the truest sense of the word. The board doesn't know, I guessed, reading her expression. Not officially. He's been characterizing the discussions as strategic partnership explorations. Only a few of us have pieced together what's really happening. She stirred her coffee, though she'd added nothing to it. Your patient advocacy program would be the first thing to go under Helix. Too expensive, too hard to quantify in quarterly reports. And Harrison's push to replace me makes more sense now, I said slowly. He's not just restructuring a department, he's preparing the hospital for sale. Exactly. Elaine's eyes met mine, serious and determined. I've spent 30 years on this board trying to keep Westridge focused on patient care over profits. I'm not about to watch it become another cog in a corporate healthcare machine. What can we do, I asked, if the board doesn't even know? They'll know by next week's meeting, Elaine said firmly. I've been gathering documentation, much like you did with your program. Financial projections, comparisons with other hospitals Helix has acquired, impact statements on community access to care. She pulled a thumb drive from her purse and slid it across the table. This has everything I've collected. I'd like you to review it, add your perspective on how these changes would affect patient care specifically. Together with your program data, we can present a complete picture of what's at stake. I picked up the small device, feeling its weight not just physical, but the weight of responsibility it represented. Harrison won't take this lying down. No, Elaine agreed. He won't. That's why we need to be absolutely prepared. Every fact checked, every projection solid. He'll try to paint us as emotional, resistant to change, stuck in the past. A familiar tactic, I said dryly. Indeed, she smiled slightly. But we have something he doesn't. What's that? Actual concern for the patients and community this hospital serves. And as you've already proven, Margaret, passion backed by meticulous documentation is a powerful combination. We spent the next hour outlining our strategy for the board meeting, identifying potential allies and opponents, anticipating counterarguments. For the first time in years, I felt the thrill of a true challenge, one worthy of the skills I'd honed over decades. "There's one more thing," Elaine said as we prepared to leave. "Jason Peterson, where does he stand?" "Surprisingly with us, I think." I told her about our rounds yesterday, his reaction to seeing the program in action, his willingness to collaborate on a revised proposal. "Good. We'll need allies from different generations. This isn't about old versus young, it's about the soul of healthcare." As we parted outside the coffee shop, Elaine squeezed my hand. "You know, when Harrison first suggested replacing you, he called you a relic from another era of healthcare. I should have challenged him more strongly then." "You're challenging him now," I said. "That's what matters." Back at the hospital, I found a message waiting from Jason, asking to meet that afternoon to work on our joint proposal. I spent the morning reviewing Elaine's files, each document confirming what she'd told me. Harrison had been systematically preparing Westridge for acquisition, emphasizing profitable service lines, reducing costs in community outreach and chronic care management, restructuring departments to align with Helix's model. By lunchtime, I had compiled my own analysis of how these changes would impact patient care. The picture was grim: reduced access for vulnerable populations, elimination of services that didn't generate sufficient profit, decreased staff-to-patient ratios. When Jason arrived at 2 p.m., I had to decide how much to share. Could I truly trust this young man I barely knew? "I've been working on our proposal," he said eagerly, spreading out his revised draft on my desk. "I think we've found a way to achieve the efficiency metrics Harrison wants while preserving the human elements that make your program effective." I studied him for a moment. "And if the metrics Harrison wants aren't actually in the hospital's best interest?" He looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Jason, what do you know about Helix Healthcare?" His expression changed, became more guarded. "They're a successful hospital group, very metrics-driven, strong financial performance." "Have you been briefed on any potential partnership between Westridge and Helix?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm my suspicion. "I'm not at liberty to discuss all aspects of my role here." "I understand," I said calmly. "But before we go further with this proposal, I need to know if we're working toward the same goal. Is your priority the well-being of our patients and community, or preparing this hospital for acquisition?" Jason was silent for a long moment, conflict evident on his face. Finally, he sighed deeply. "When I was hired, I was told my role was to modernize outdated systems and improve operational efficiency. It was only in the past week that I learned about the Helix discussions." He ran a hand through his hair. "To be honest, I'm uncomfortable with the direction things are heading. What I saw yesterday on rounds, that's what drew me to healthcare in the first place, not spreadsheets and shareholder value." I felt myself relax slightly. "Then I think there's something you should see." I turned my computer screen toward him, showing the analysis I'd compiled from Elaine's data. "This is what happens when hospitals like ours are acquired by groups like Helix. Service line reductions, staff cuts, community program eliminations. The financial metrics improve, but the human cost is enormous." Jason studied the screen, his expression growing more troubled. "These projected cuts to the oncology supportive care program that would affect patients like Harold Keller." "Yes," I said simply, "and hundreds more like him." He looked up at me. "What are you planning to do with this information?" "Present it to the board next week, alongside the data about my program. They need to understand the full implications of the path Harrison is leading them down." "He'll fight back hard," Jason warned. He has the CEO's ear, and several board members are already aligned with his vision. I know. That's why I need allies who understand both the financial and human aspects of healthcare. People who can speak to the value of what we do in terms the board will respect. People like me, he said, understanding dawning. The MBA who's seen both sides. Exactly. Jason was quiet for a moment, thinking. This could affect my career. Harrison hired me personally. It could, I acknowledged. I won't pretend there's no risk. He looked back at the screen, at the projected cuts to services, the communities that would lose access to care. My grandmother wouldn't have survived her stroke if she'd been treated at a hospital like the one these numbers describe. He straightened in his chair. What do you need from me? Relief washed over me. Your expertise, your perspective, and your testimony about what you observed in our program. You have it, he said firmly. All of it. And I think I can bring some others on board as well, analysts in my department who've been uncomfortable with some of the directives we've received. For the next 2 hours, we worked together, integrating his technological expertise with my patient care knowledge, building a case not just for preserving the advocacy program, but for protecting Westridge's mission as a community hospital. When he left, I felt more hopeful than I had in days. The battle ahead would be difficult, but I was no longer fighting alone. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Elaine and I worked separately and together, building our case. Jason brought 2 financial analysts from his department into our confidence, young professionals who provided additional data on how similar hospital acquisitions had affected patient outcomes and community health metrics. Word was spreading through the hospital. Nurses, doctors, technicians, and support staff stopped by my office to offer support, share stories, ask how they could help. Many had worked at other facilities acquired by corporate groups and had first-hand experience of the changes that followed. By Monday, the day before the board meeting, we had assembled a comprehensive presentation. Facts, figures, projections, testimonials, everything meticulously documented and sourced. No one would be able to dismiss us as merely emotional. I was reviewing our materials one final time when my office door opened without a knock. Thomas Harrison stood there, his expression cold. Margaret, I thought we should talk before tomorrow's meeting. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Please, sit down. He remained standing. I know what you're planning. Elaine isn't as discreet as she thinks. And what am I planning, Thomas? To disrupt important strategic discussions with outdated sentimentality about what this hospital used to be. His voice was dismissive. Healthcare is changing. Westridge needs to change with it. By selling to Helix? I asked calmly, without proper board discussion or community input. His eyes narrowed. Preliminary discussions about strategic partnerships are within my purview as director. Discussions, yes. Systematically restructuring the hospital to prepare for acquisition without board knowledge, that's a different matter. He moved closer to my desk. You're making serious accusations based on speculation and rumor. No, Thomas, I'm making factual statements based on documentation and data. I held his gaze steadily, the same approach I've always taken. The board trusts my judgment, he said. They understand that difficult decisions sometimes need to be made for long-term sustainability. Perhaps. But they deserve to make those decisions with complete information. He studied me for a moment, then his approach suddenly shifted. Margaret, we've worked together for 20 years. You've been a valuable part of this hospital. I respect what you've built. Thank you, I said, waiting for the inevitable, but, he continued, you're nearing retirement age. The advocacy program needs new leadership for a new era. I can make that transition comfortable for you. A consulting role, perhaps. Recognition at the annual gala. A fitting end to an admirable career. The offer was tempting, I had to admit. A graceful exit, my legacy somewhat preserved, none of the conflict that tomorrow would bring. But then I thought of Harold Keller receiving treatment that his insurance company had initially denied. Of Clara, navigating her husband's illness with the support she needed. Of the thousands of patients who had benefited from a program that saw them as people, not profit centers. I appreciate the offer, Thomas, but this isn't about me or my career. It's about the patients we serve and the community that relies on us. His expression hardened again. Always the idealist. That's why you've never advanced beyond department head, Margaret. You never learned to see the bigger picture. I see a very clear picture, I replied. One where healthcare serves people, not shareholders. Where a community hospital remains true to its mission. Admirable sentiments, he said coldly. But sentiment doesn't pay the bills. Neither does corporate acquisition, in the long run. Ask the communities where Helix has closed underperforming hospitals after acquisition. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. You won't win this, Margaret. The numbers are on my side. After he left, I sat quietly, processing the conversation. Harrison was confident, perhaps with good reason. He had been cultivating board relationships for years, positioning himself as the financial savior of an increasingly challenging healthcare landscape. But he had also just confirmed everything we suspected. The Helix acquisition wasn't speculative, it was actively in progress. And now we had one more piece of evidence to present. I picked up my phone and called Elaine. Harrison just paid me a visit, I told her. Tried to buy me off with a consulting role and a pretty retirement party. Did he confirm the Helix discussions? She asked. Not in so many words, but yes, he's confident about tomorrow. So am I, Elaine said firmly. The truth has a way of being persuasive when presented properly. After we hung up, I gathered my things to head home. Tomorrow would require all my energy and focus. In the parking lot, I ran into Nurse Jacobs ending her shift. Ready for tomorrow? She asked. As ready as I can be, I replied. The nurses will be there, she said. Not in the meeting, of course, but outside. A show of support. The technicians and housekeeping staff, too. I felt a lump form in my throat. That's not necessary. It is to us, she said simply. This hospital is our workplace, but it's also our hospital when we get sick, when our families need care. We have a stake in what happens too. As I drove home, her words stayed with me. Westridge wasn't just my workplace of 42 years. It was a community institution, one that had served generations of families, including my own. My husband had received his cancer treatment there before he died 15 years ago. My children had been born there, my grandchildren too. The stakes were personal for all of us who called this community home. At home, I carefully laid out my clothes for tomorrow's most professional suit, the one I reserved for important presentations. Navy blue, well-tailored despite being nearly a decade old. Pearl earrings my husband had given me on our 35th anniversary. Low heels that wouldn't aggravate my arthritic knee during what promised to be a long meeting. The armor of an older woman who had earned her place at the table and wasn't about to be dismissed. I reviewed our presentation once more before bed, though I knew the material by heart. Every fact checked, every projection based on solid data, every testimonial authentic. Harrison would try to find weaknesses, places to insert doubt. There wouldn't be any. Sleep came fitfully that night, my mind cycling through scenarios, arguments, counter-arguments. By 5 a.m., I gave up and rose to start my day, fortifying myself with strong tea and the quiet ritual of preparation. When I arrived at the hospital at 7:30, an hour before the board meeting, I was surprised to find the entrance lined with staff. Nurses, doctors, technicians, housekeeping personnel, cafeteria workers, at least 50 people standing quietly on either side of the walkway. As I approached, they began to applaud. Not loudly, not disruptively, but with a steady, respectful rhythm that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Nurse Jacobs stepped forward. "We just wanted you to know you're not walking in there alone." "Thank you," I managed, deeply moved by the gesture. Inside, I found Jason and our small team in the conference room adjacent to the boardroom, reviewing our materials one final time. "The attendance list for today's meeting has grown," he informed me. "Word has spread about the Helix discussions. Several department heads have requested to observe." "Harrison must be thrilled," I said dryly. Actually, he tried to limit attendance to voting members only, but the bylaws allow for department heads to observe any meeting that might impact their areas. Jason smiled slightly. "I may have reminded a few people of that provision." At 8:25, we gathered our materials and moved to the boardroom. It was already nearly full, with board members seated around the large table and department heads lining the walls. Harrison sat at the head of the table beside CEO Matthews, their heads close together in conversation. Elaine nodded to me from her seat, calm confidence in her expression. We had agreed she would introduce the concerns about the Helix acquisition, using her position as a long-standing board member to lend authority to the revelation. I would follow with the patient advocacy program data and the broader implications for patient care. At precisely 8:30, CEO Matthews called the meeting to order. "We have a full agenda today," he began, "but our primary item of business is to revisit the leadership transition in the patient advocacy program. Director Harrison will update us on the plan, and then Dr. Abernathy has requested time to present additional information." Harrison rose smoothly, moving to the front of the room with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "As you'll recall from our previous discussion, we're implementing a modernization of the patient advocacy function," he began. "While Dr. Abernathy's program has served us well in the past, healthcare is evolving rapidly. Our new approach will leverage technology to increase efficiency while maintaining quality." He clicked through several slides showing glossy graphics of patient satisfaction metrics, cost projections, and implementation timelines. It was a polished presentation, designed to impress and reassure. "Mr. Peterson has been refining the implementation plan and will oversee the transition," Harrison concluded. "We anticipate full implementation within 3 months, with projected cost savings of 20% annually, while maintaining or improving patient satisfaction scores." He returned to his seat, confident and composed. Several board members nodded approvingly at the clean, straightforward plan. CEO Matthews turned to me. "Dr. Abernathy, you have the floor." I rose slowly, gathering my materials. As I moved to the front of the room, I felt the weight of every one of my 73 years, the knowledge accumulated, the battles fought, the wisdom earned through successes and failures alike. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak today," I began. "Before I address the patient advocacy program specifically, there's a broader context that must be understood for any decision to be made with full information." I nodded to Elaine, who stood and joined me. "The changes to the patient advocacy program are not isolated initiatives," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "They are part of a systematic restructuring of Westridge Hospital to prepare for acquisition by Helix Healthcare Group." The room erupted in murmurs. Several board members looked genuinely shocked, while others carefully maintained neutral expressions. Harrison's face flushed dark red. "This is an outrageous accusation," he said sharply. "We have had exploratory discussions with several healthcare organizations about potential partnerships, as any responsible administration would." "These have gone well beyond exploratory discussions," Elaine countered, activating the presentation we had prepared. "For the past 6 months, department restructuring, service line evaluations, and staffing decisions have systematically aligned with Helix's acquisition playbook." She displayed a timeline showing Harrison's management decisions alongside similar pre-acquisition changes at other hospitals now owned by Helix. "The board has not authorized acquisition discussions," said Dr. Kenwood, the chief of surgery. "Strategic planning, yes, but not this." "Which is precisely why this information needs to be brought to light now," I said, "before irreversible changes are made without proper governance." I moved to the next slide, showing projected impacts on community access to care based on Helix's pattern at other acquired hospitals. Within 18 months of Helix acquisition, community hospitals typically see a 30% reduction in services deemed low margin. These include geriatric care, chronic disease management, and preventive health program services essential to our community, but not immediately profitable. The room had grown completely silent, all eyes focused on our presentation. "The patient advocacy program would be among the first casualties," I continued. "Not because it isn't effective, but because its value isn't easily captured in quarterly profit reports." I methodically walked them through the data we had assembled: patient outcomes, litigation prevention, community health impacts, staff retention improvements. With each slide, the contrast between Harrison's glossy projections and our detailed analysis became more stark. "Dr. Abernathy's program doesn't just help individual patients," Jason said, stepping forward unexpectedly. "It's a systemic approach to healthcare that values both efficiency and humanity. As someone initially tasked with replacing this program, I can now confidently state that doing so would be a serious mistake." He presented our collaborative proposal, a modernized approach that integrated technology while preserving the human connections that made the program effective. "This approach achieves the efficiency metrics without sacrificing quality or community trust," he explained. "It's the type of innovation that demonstrates why independent hospitals like Westridge are vital to healthcare's future." For the next hour, we presented our complete case: the value of the advocacy program, the implications of the Helix acquisition, and the alternative vision for Westridge's future as an independent, community-focused hospital. When we finished, the room remained silent for several long moments. Harrison was the first to speak. "This is an impressive exercise in speculation and sentiment," he said dismissively. "But healthcare is a business reality. Independent hospitals like Westridge are struggling nationwide. We need the economies of scale and capital investment that only larger healthcare groups can provide." "At what cost?" asked Dr. Kenwood. "If these projections are accurate, we'd be sacrificing our core mission for financial stability." "The projections are overblown," Harrison insisted, "designed to create emotional resistance to necessary change." "The projections are based on Helix's own financial reports at their acquired hospitals," Elaine countered. "Every number is sourced and verifiable." CEO Matthews, who had been notably quiet, finally spoke. "Thomas, how far have the discussions with Helix actually progressed?" Harrison hesitated, clearly calculating his response. "We have had preliminary valuation assessments and some early term sheet discussions. Nothing binding." "Without board approval or knowledge," Matthews clarified, his expression grave. "The timing wasn't right to bring it to the full board," Harrison said. "I was building the case first. And restructuring the hospital to align with their model," I added quietly. The discussion continued for another hour, intense but respectful. Board members asked pointed questions. Department heads offered perspectives on how the proposed changes would affect patient care, and the financial implications of both paths were thoroughly examined. Throughout it all, I maintained a calm, factual approach. No raised voice, no dramatic appeals to emotion, just the steady presentation of evidence and reasoned analysis. The very opposite of the emotional woman Harrison had dismissed. Finally, CEO Matthews called for a decision. "We have two matters before us," he said. "First, the leadership of the patient advocacy program. Second, the broader question of Westridge's future and any potential acquisition discussions. let's address them separately. The vote on the advocacy program came first. After brief deliberation, the board voted 14-3 to maintain the program under my leadership, with a mandate to implement the modernization plan Jason and I had developed. The second vote was unanimous. All acquisition discussions with Helix or other for-profit hospital groups would be suspended pending a comprehensive community impact study and full board review. As the meeting adjourned, board members and department heads came forward to speak with me. Some offered congratulations, others apologies for not having asked more questions earlier. Throughout it all, I maintained my professional composure, though inside I felt a profound sense of vindication. Harrison left quickly, avoiding eye contact. His future at Westridge was uncertain now, his unilateral actions having severely damaged his standing with the board. Outside the boardroom, the hallway was filled with staff who had been waiting for news. When I emerged, a spontaneous cheer erupted, quickly hushed in remembrance that this was, after all, a hospital with patients trying to rest. Nurse Jacobs approached with Clara Keller beside her. "We heard," she said simply. "Thank you." Clara took my hand in hers. "Harold's doctor says the treatment is working. We might have more time than we thought." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what we would have done without you fighting for us." I squeezed her hand gently. "That's what advocates do, Clara. It's what this hospital does." As the crowd dispersed, Jason remained behind. "So," he said with a smile, "when do we start implementing our modernization plan?" "Tomorrow," I replied. "But today, I think I'm going to take the afternoon off. It's been an eventful morning." "You've earned it," he agreed, "and much more." As I walked to my office to gather my things, I passed the wall of hospital photographs near the main entrance, images documenting Westridge's 100-year history. Staff in outdated uniforms, old equipment long since replaced, buildings renovated or torn down as the hospital evolved. In one faded photograph from the 1970s, I spotted myself as a young nurse, barely visible in the background of a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just starting my career, unaware of the journey ahead, the battles I would fight, the lives I would touch. I paused, struck by the continuity of it all. Hospitals were more than buildings or businesses. They were the accumulated knowledge and care of generations of healthcare workers, the saved lives and eased suffering of countless patients, the trust of communities who turned to them in their most vulnerable moments. Some things in healthcare had changed dramatically over my 42-year career. Technology had advanced, treatments had improved, systems had evolved. But the core of it, the human connection between caregiver and patient, remained constant. That was what we had fought to preserve today, not just a program or a job, but a vision of healthcare that put people first. In my office, I found a small gift box on my desk with a note from Elaine. "For future battles. Though I hope today's victory gives us some peace for a while." Inside was a beautiful silver pen, engraved with a simple message: "Facts speak, truth matters." I smiled, tucking it into my purse. Harrison had called me emotional, thinking it would diminish me. Instead, it had galvanized me to fight not just for myself, but for everything I believed in. The manila folder that had started it all still sat on my desk. I picked it up, running my fingers over the worn edges. Inside were the facts and figures that had spoken for me when my voice alone might not have been enough. The paperwork that had given weight to my words, substance to my concerns. But it wasn't just the paperwork that had won the day. It was the relationships built over decades, the trust earned through consistent care and commitment, the integrity maintained even when it would have been easier to compromise. As I prepared to leave, my office phone rang one last time. It was Dr. Kenwood. "Margaret," he said warmly, "the board has asked me to extend an invitation. We'd like you to join a newly formed patient care advisory committee." Your perspective would be invaluable as we chart Westridge's future. I thought about it for only a moment. I'd be honored, James, thank you. No, Margaret, thank you for reminding us all what this hospital stands for. After hanging up, I gathered my things and headed for the door. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, warming the corridor as I made my way out. Several staff members nodded or smiled as I passed, small acknowledgments of the morning's events. Outside, I paused on the steps, looking back at the building that had been my professional home for so long. I had fought for my place here today, but more importantly, I had fought for what this place meant to our community. They had called me emotional, using my passion for patient care as a weapon against me. But passion guided by principle and supported by facts wasn't a weakness. It was the most powerful force in healthcare and perhaps the only thing that could save it. I descended the steps carefully, mindful of my arthritic knee, but feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But today, at least, the paperwork had spoken, the truth had prevailed, and an older woman's voice had finally been heard. Not because she had shouted, but because she had prepared. Not because she had pleaded, but because she had proved her case. Not through emotion alone, but through emotion channeled into meticulous documentation and strategic action. I reached my car and looked back one last time at Westridge Hospital, standing solid against the afternoon sky. Some would call my attachment to this place emotional. They would be right. And that was exactly as it should be.